This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, Jim, we'll send a quick link in a second here. Megan's helping us with the recording function. We're trying to get that figured out. Okay, now we're recording.
We're good.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Jim, please speak up if you don't get that in a minute, but Megan's going to send you the link to it. Anybody else, also please speak up if you're having issues hearing us or otherwise getting the GoToMeeting link to work. So today, it's been a while. We wanted to touch base with you all and make sure everyone's in the loop, especially with what's going on with the implementation working group and where things are headed with updating your basin plans in the near future. We did have some funding come through that was a package that was part of the projects bill, the annual CWCB construction fund allocation that does provide funding for the next few years of all things water plan, including basin plan updates. So we're excited about where this is headed. It's funding for the next 3 or 4 years, so this is not something we're going to rush through and try and get done in the next year or so. This is going to take time, and we know it's a heavy lift for everyone, so we just wanted to make sure that that folks are on board and everyone is kind of plugged into the process and giving us the feedback that we need. Oh, sorry.
You're good.
Okay, so this is our quick agenda for the day. We've kind of divided things out into 3 main categories. So we've got a discussion about all these different bits of funding that have been evolving over the last few months, especially during the session. Then we'll talk about the working group process, some of the outputs, and then really what the next steps are as we wrap things up in the next 6 weeks or so at the end of June, the end of the fiscal year. And then really diving into the technical update. So this is the statewide water supply initiative that we are renaming the analysis and technical update to the water plan. It's all part of the water plan process, so that's the rebranding. And then how the basin plan updates fit into that, the timeline, different events coming up, all of those different things. So first of all, a lot of you have probably heard about the sports betting measure. This has been evolving throughout the legislative session. It did pass at the end. I believe this was Bill 1327. It was a referred measure, so it will go to the ballot in November. So it's certainly not in effect as of yet. There are funding specifics for the water plan that still need to be determined. So there's a lot of things that are still kind of evolving around this. From the best of our estimations, it could yield about $2 million to $20 million per year. There's a number of moving parts, a number of things that need to be funded first before it would actually go to the water plan grant program. That little flyer you see, or the little poster on this slide, is part of the campaign from the For the Love of Colorado group. This is the group that involves a number of different stakeholders throughout the state, but was originally kind of funded and started through the conversation with the Walton Family Foundation and the Gates Family Foundation. So they are still very plugged into that process moving forward. We, at CWCB, are certainly monitoring this. We are not directly involved at this point. If this were to pass, one of the things that would need to happen is that the actual funding would need to be processed through a different piece of legislation. So it does not include the funding appropriation. And I've got Lauren Ress is here as well. We've got a number of CWCB staff in the room. So if I don't say anything correctly, Lauren, please feel free to step in. And please, folks on the line, feel free to pipe up with any questions as we go through this, and we'll certainly have time for discussion at the end as well. Okay, so here are a couple things, and we can send these out. I don't believe we have these posted. We sent these to some folks upon request. We can definitely send these out as part of the package after this call. So the fiscal note, so all the details on this legislation, on House Bill 1327 that did pass, and then the flyer there that really shows kind of the process of how this thing would work as it's envisioned. I believe that particular flyer was put together by that For the Love of Colorado coalition that is supporting this, and so they will have that, that previous flyer that I showed with their new logo. I think they have a whole campaign for this thing that's going to start in July of this year, I believe. They had some sort of a kickoff event with some of their new branding and where the campaign is headed. That was a week or two ago. So things are definitely very much evolving as we speak on this. So the other big piece this year that was certainly changing throughout the legislative session was the water plan funding that was in the governor's budget. So in Hickenlooper's proposed budget, prior to leaving office, he had proposed $30 million for water plan funding, and that was retained by Governor Polis. With a number of conversations, a lot of back and forth with the legislators, that was reduced down to $10 million, with the breakdown being $8.3 million to backfill water plan grant funding over the next 3 years to be spent by fiscal year 2021-22, and then $1.7 million of the 10 to really help explore the demand management discussions across the state, work on some pilot projects and whatnot. So that we are actually working on a discussion with our board specifically as to how to allocate that $8.3 million, whether that would all be in 1 year, whether it would be over the next 3 years, kind of what the strategy might be moving forward for potential new asks with the legislature as we move things forward. And all of this, of course, will be allocated first of the fiscal year on July 1. And then for the water plan grant funds, as part of the construction fund, the projects bill that we have every year, we had an allocation of $7 million that was approved. And the current proposal that I had just mentioned for kind of how we really tie this in with that $8.3 million from the governor's budget, the current proposal that we'll be discussing this week at the board meeting is to basically bring that up to $10 million. So $3 million of the 8.3 this year to bring the 7 up to 10 for water plan grant funding. Certainly subject to discussion with our board. We're also proposing that will be discussed further in September. We have our annual finance committee meeting every year where they really dive into the details on things like this. That timing, I think, will be advantageous to some extent because we'll see the demand initially, at least, coming in for the next fiscal year with our deadline in August. So we'll really be able to see kind of where things are settling, at least initially. So that'll help with that conversation. And if you folks are interested, it's agenda item number 28. So towards the end of our board meeting this Thursday, there's a board memo that goes through a lot more of the details, actually on all of these different funding sources, and that's available on the agenda on our website. You can just click on the agenda item 28 link, the title. And then finally, water supply reserve funds. We will likely be having the full $10 million this year due to a severance tax actually bouncing back. So, oil and gas development, being a lot more robust than it has been in years past. Severance tax is finally starting to catch up. So it looks like we will have $7.5 million. We are still double checking the numbers on that. And then we have $2.5 million, from the projects bill through the construction fund. So again, also subsidizing that funding source to bring that up to the full $10.0 million. And then we are still working with the same distribution that we've had in years past. So even though we've got some change to the mechanics of how the severance tax funding is actually distributed to us, we're still going to operate the program for the time being with that 40%, 30%, 30% split. So 40% being available to the basin-wide and statewide accounts on July 1st, 30% on January 1st, and then the final 30% on April 1st.
Hey, could I ask a question about that? This is Mike Preston. The full 10, you're saying $3 million for the water plans, and then $7 million in WSRF. Or I didn't quite understand that.
No, sorry, Mike. So for WSRF, we've got about $7.5 million from severance tax, so from the true source for those funds. Okay. This year, like the last couple of years, we have stepped in with part of the broader package for what we've been calling water plan implementation funding, to basically backfill that to bring it up to the $10 million. So we've got $2.5 million that was in the projects bill specifically for WSRF, so that we can make that whole and bring that up to the $10 million. So that's different than the water plan grant funding, which is also, it's all part of that package in the projects bill that we designate as kind of water plan implementation funding that I think was $20 million this year.
Okay, that's real helpful. And so the the 10 million, how does it get split between basin and statewide, or is that known?
Good question, Mike. So that will be the same split that we've had in years past. And so that is actually still built into the criterion guidelines. So we have been talking about reconvening the criterion guidelines committee, which involves members of our board as well as IPCC members, and then needs to be approved by both bodies. So it's not something we do terribly often, every 3, 4, 5 years or so. So we have, long story short, we have a running list of potential changes to the program. Mostly minor things, but mechanical things to help things operate a little bit better. So that may happen, but at this point we're not looking to change that. So the split as it's in there right now is 36% to the basin account and 64% to the statewide account, and then that 36% split 9 ways.
Okay.
Could you remind us what that's worth on the basin split? Each roundtable
per year. 400,000 for each basin. Craig just reminded me.
400,000.
Okay. Yeah, per year.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. And long story short, too, another thing just to keep in mind, we are really working internally to bring a little more consistency to all of our grant programs. That being said, it's complicated because all the programs evolved at different times for different reasons, have different funding sources, different criterion guidelines. But that's part of the conversation potentially with changing the criterion guidelines moving forward, would be to maybe have a little more consistency between the programs on things like, matching requirements and kind of how the application process operates. We do actually have an RFP out. We're working on creating a whole new grants portal. And we all kind of to tie in with an update to our full website as well. So we really hope to have a much more modern application process within the next year or so, but those things take time. Okay, and so the last thing I think I'm going to hand over to Russ Sands here. Moving forward, we're really looking at 3 main categories for kind of how we approach the whole planning process, and 3 questions that we keep hearing that we really want to try to answer. So why would we fund more planning? Why are we doing this? Why do we perpetually plan? What is the update timeline? What makes sense the most? How often should you be updating these things? And then really, how will the Basin Roundtables be involved? We know everyone is extremely busy. We know the last process with creating the initial basin implementation plans and certainly Water Plan itself was very taxing and involved a lot of volunteer time. So we want to just make sure that we're cognizant of how we do this moving forward, and at least on the front end, we can engage with you, understand your expectations, and really try to do this in the most appropriate way possible.
Thanks, Greg. So Russ Sands, CWCB. So just wanted to highlight again, so in that, as part of the project bill, we've talked to this group and presented roundtables to the board about that $5.5 million request. And that roughly breaks out to about $3 million going into basin implementation plan updates and also the project list updates, so the IPPs. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about why that's so critical here in a second. And then about $1 million for the water plan updates, updating the water plan itself, and then the remainder of kind of being broken out across a number of projects. So it's kind of tying in with a website update and grants and loan portal, also looking at developing a more robust projects database or IPP database, as well as updating House Bill 1051. And then we also had some other money to kind of plug in on education outreach efforts or things like the C9 Summit, which we'll also talk about. This slide I just wanted to highlight, we continue to hear sometimes, at least once a month, I feel like we get why aren't we implementing the water plan? Nothing's happened to the water plan. It needs to be implemented. It's just a reminder that the reality is that the water plan update, when we talk about updating the water plan or even the measurable objectives in the water plan, they're really split between planning and project. So there's planning implementation and project implementation. And if you look at the critical actions, we've harped a lot on this kind of table in Chapter 11 that talks about the planning cycle, and that's certainly a part of implementing the plan is updating the plan. It was designed as a living document, and to keep it living, we have to keep it current. So things like the technical update, updating the BIPs, updating the project list, and then the water plan itself all feed that cycle, of course. But even if you're reviewing the critical action plan in Chapter 10, you'll notice when they talk about the types, of efforts that are listed under each of those, a lot of them come out to process, programs, legislative action, and maybe funding for projects. But it's just a reminder to note that we are constantly, every day, implementing the water plan and working on that, as are you, and it's a team effort. So just wanted to kind of hit that on the head. So why fund more projects? That's part of what we are kind of required to do. And I think the kind of tandem question that we've heard that comes up around this is, how does our update cycle compare to other states? Well, we were involved in an update effort. There's a really cool report from the American Water Resources Association, but they looked at 17 states, including ours, that have water plans and tried to do a little bit of comparative analytics. It's pretty helpful. Some interesting things that came out. I think one that I found helpful is if you look at state spending, as a reminder, as Greg started this, that $5.5 million request that we put in isn't just for this year or for one effort. It's really the full context of the next 4 years, from getting to where we're at now or where we'll be in July with the release of the technical update, through the BIP updates and the project list updates, and then the water plan itself. So over the next 4 years, that breaks out to about $1.4 million a year. And if you look at what other states, or these other 16 states, are spending on water planning efforts, you can see that Colorado, for our $5.5 million request over the next 4 years, really filters out kind of in middle to low side of that. So just kind of putting the test of reasonableness to it, we like to think that we're trying to be efficient with the dollars that we're asking for, and really trying to leverage these two things so that as we're working on BIP updates, we're really cognizant that is updating the water plan and trying to work with this general contractor model to do both of those efforts at once. Another thing this report highlights is just the timing. So again, why are we planning? We hear a lot, and we certainly understand it, the kind of planning fatigue, but just in thinking of context here for how often other states update their water plans, it looks like the average, you see a lot around 5 years, and then the average is 7 years. And the cycle that we're on right now, kind of aiming to have the water plan update, next water plan update in 2022, that puts us on a 7-year cycle. And you can see that, we're many of the states are in the 5 years, some are above, but we're certainly kind of right in that average mix there. So one question that we've got a lot, we're talking about updating the water plan, we're talking about updating the BIPs, and this has come out from the working group too, the implementation working group, is what do we mean? What's this timeline really look like? And so we wanted to kind of break that down a little bit to, we know roundtables are curious and different levels of wanting to get started, or some certainly are already doing things that would probably fold into a BIP update. But, we really look at, in accordance with the goals in the water plan, to initiate the BIP updates in 2018, as that having kicked off last year, first with a survey that we did at Water Congress, then more formally kind of announcing that with our board and with IBCC, and then developing the implementation working group and having that kickoff meeting all by the end of last year. We've carried that process forward, and as we look to complete the technical update by July, are really kind of seeing this whole first year effort really around kind of planning and scoping of that effort. And that's in keeping with any big effort that we've initiated when we first launched into the technical update or SWASI. You spend quite an amount of time just kind of looking at your process, what you want to update, and getting contractors on board. So as we kind of look at this next cycle, this year 2 effort, if we look at that as really a kickoff at the C9, the Colorado 9 Roundtable Summit, in September, that really starts the BIP update process. And we look at that as kind of hoping to have a contractor on board in terms of that general contractor, hopefully by that September timeline, and then working with the roundtables to hire local experts kind of in that next cycle. So if I break this down a little bit further, let me take this, out. So year 2 is really this kind of working through the hiring contractors, looking at project lists is a huge piece of that first effort. And then kind of that 3rd year, the 2020-2021 timeframe of updating the document. So a more granular, I'm sorry, this got a little bit, looks like it got it moved on the slides a little bit. But if we take this out to a more granular level, you'll see that the kind of 2019, that first part, end of this year, if you look at it that way, through to January of next year, we're really looking at that as being kind of the hiring process for getting local contractors or local experts on board. And then really looking at projects, digging into the IPPs, what needs to come off the list that's already been completed, what new IPPs or projects need to be put onto the list. Really looking holistically at the data for all the IPPs and saying what's missing. Certainly, we'll talk a little bit about cost here in a second and show you some examples of where there are just some big data gaps in the existing IPP listing. And then really looking at that last year is updating the document itself. So we can clean this up a little bit and send this out, but hoping to talk through this a little bit more with the implementation working group and start to kind of frame out what we hope is a bit of a stepwise effort to getting the BIPs updated, and then certainly running the water plan update concurrently and hoping to have a draft of the water plan near the end of 2021 or even first quarter of 2022, having that open for public comment, and then trying to have that finalized by the end of the year and kind of time with the 7-year anniversary of the water plan. So I talked about this general contractor, and we've talked about that and presented several times on this, but we've gotten some questions. One that came up is the RFP going to be public? Absolutely. Not only is it going to be public, but we really are looking to have you, this group specifically, involved in that effort. So we are in the process of drafting an RFP. It will go out. You'll see it. We will let you know. But we'd also like to invite the chairs to be on the selection committee to help us select that general contractor. Part of that is because we know that you guys would like to have some insight into the process. We certainly want to be as transparent as possible, but also because we recognize that this general contractor is going to be overseeing the local experts, and we want to make sure that you all have a high degree of confidence in who gets selected and have a say in that process. So if the general contractor is overseeing the full project and certainly has to have a deep technical bench and probably some I guess a core team that would support that group, there's also going to be these local experts. And we've thrown out this term, and in talking with a few people, I realized that sometimes that might be taken differently or mean different things to different people. So when we say local expert, what we're really looking for is an expert who knows the basin, somebody who knows how the first BIP came together, that's familiar with the IPPs and project lists, that works with the roundtable currently, and that is someone that the basin is going to feel comfortable talking to. And quite honestly, someone that the basin feels comfortable saying things to that they may not directly say to us, that can be that kind of go-between to work with the GC to say, here's how things need to be tailored for my basin, or here's how my basin's thinking about things differently, and work to really come up with collaborative solutions. So we kind of see that local expert as a chief integrator. Now, it could be that there are other local advisors or local experts that local contractor may want to consider bringing on or being a part of the team too, and float that up. There's certainly probably bandwidth to do that if that's something that the basins land on. But if the kind of local expert that's your chief point person or chief integrator is kind of attending all the roundtable meetings, is being that person to facilitate conversations at the roundtable level with the GC, with CWCB, then there may be other local experts that are peeling off some technical component of that. I think we heard in Arkansas, for example, where they need to bring on somebody on the environmental side. That may be or may not be. And it's also the case that the local expert may be the general contractor that we hire. The BIPs were all written by a different consulting group. Some of those are bigger firms that you can imagine would probably be applying for this. So if a firm that wrote your BIP is the one that gets selected as the general contractor, it may be the basin's desire that they work directly with that general contractor as their local expert in that case. So there's any number of ways this could go. We just wanted to provide at least a little bit of context, and we're hoping to kind of write this language into the RFP so it's clear but not overly prescriptive, so that the RFP responses we get back have a little leeway for those that are submitting on it to kind of shape it as they think would work best. So again, we're working through this process now. We'd like to work with you on that hiring effort. Ideally, we would get that under RFP posted, selected, and get a contractor selected and be able to announce that at the C9 Summit. that may be too tight of a timeline, but it's kind of the aspirational goal now, and we'll see if we can hit it. To talk a little bit about the implementation working group and kind of the input we've gotten from them, maybe some of the outputs that we've gotten from them. As you recall, in the first BIPs, CWCB wrote a fairly lengthy 8 to 11 page kind of document that kind of said, here's what the BIP needs to include. This time around, we're really seeing this entire effort. It's not about just rebranding for, calling SWASI a technical update for no good reason. It's really to look at this comprehensively and see these things as all really fitting together. And part of fitting together means that this is really the start of an iterative process where the roundtables and through their basin implementation plans and projects get to go back and kind of look and say, here's what I didn't like in the technical update or didn't work for me, and help us refine it. And so as part of that and being true to that, we worked with the implementation working group to help develop a bit of guidance. So a much shorter, we're hoping a little more digestible document that we can take to the C9 Summit that would really be a little bit of that roadmap for how the BIP updates would move forward, understanding that then all of that goes to the roundtable level. Roundtables hire their local experts, and then they shape that from there. So again, a very iterative process. Another thing that we've talked about with the implementation working group is really helping us draft some technical update recommendations. So in the technical update at the end, we'll have some next steps, kind of recommendations of where to take things. So some of those you could imagine are what I just said, of looking at the data that we have, refining it if it needs refining, looking at that holistically, and really looking to see how this general contractor might help kind of unify and work across the local experts so there can be some nice interplay across basins if there's any desire to team up on efforts or even just get different perspective on what other basins are doing. But we are kind of drafting that, and we'll be talking about that with the implementation working group at our next meeting. And then this last piece, and we'll dig in here a little bit, we've talked a lot about missing project data and really the need to develop kind of at some level of tiering. About 3 of the BIPs have some level of tiering in them now, and we're looking to see is there a way to kind of standardize that in a not overly prescriptive way, and have really gotten some great input from the implementation working group. Of course, nothing is set in stone at all. This is all to be taken forward to the next steps and iterated on with the basin roundtables. But when you think about missing project data, if we have an IPP that's in place, we have a project that has 20 criteria associated with it that includes cost, that includes yield, that includes where it's at on a map, lat long information. That already sets up some kind of tiering as opposed to other projects who maybe don't have a name associated with them or don't have a project sponsor, don't have any dollars associated with it. So we're looking at, maybe even one criteria of just the tiered matrix may be this data. So I'll dig in a little bit here, and then I will kick over things to Megan, who's been doing a lot of work in this area. But as we talk, we kind of set this off with funding. As there is increasingly discussions around funding across the state, other things that may go to a ballot initiative and what that long-term goal is to fund the water plan update, it's increasingly important to note that the dollars that are put in the water plan, note very clearly, it must be emphasized, costs weren't associated with the vast majority of projects identified. And here you can see that breakout of costs that are associated with the IPPs by basin. So at best, we have 50% that have some level of funding associated, and then all the way down to 0. And this is not to point fingers at anyone. I mean, this was a process that we went through. There arguably is not a lot of great ways to get costing information if you don't have a project sponsor, you don't have somebody hired that's going to be able to price that out for you. And that is one of the reasons that we built, have worked through. It's really building on a legacy of efforts that help build these numbers. But we're working to develop and have now that beta of the costing tool out. And we're really hoping to put that to use so that we can get 100% or something close to that in terms of what the true costs are of these projects, how and where they fill gaps. And this is going to be a big emphasis of that first year. So once the contractor is on board, a local contractor has been selected, we're really seeing this as the first order of business, is to kind of really clean house and say what project data are we missing and how can we strengthen it. And so if costing is one of those, I'll turn it over to Megan to talk about some of those other areas.
I guess before we do that, that was a lot of information. Is there any questions? there's only a few more slides, so feel free to ask now, or we can chat at the end. So in the April implementation working group, we shared drafts of these. This is a snapshot of what we're calling just one-page summary sheets that have insights into each of your basin implementation plans. We heard some concerns early on about the level of effort required to initiate BIPs. So in keeping with all of the process streamlining that Russ was just stepped through, we also enlisted the help of 3 master students to review each of those basin plans from 2015. So that's 3 people who read every single page of every single plan across the state to really help us get a better idea of what's the true level of essential updates. In these one-pagers, which we'll send around to each of you in a follow-up email, along with some other items from this call, are really intended to help your roundtable members reorient themselves with their plan. The reality is there's a lot of new members that likely haven't, they might not even know the goals that were first listed in the 2015 BIPs. And so this is just an insight sheet in draft form. We would love your feedback if you have any, to help start that conversation and really give people just a place to start to think about, okay, where were we back in 2013, 2015? Are our goals still the same? Are there new goals? Have any emerged as priority goals? And these are the types of things that we want to kick off at that C9 Summit in this next phase. And on the back page, the image you see, the larger image about projects, that's the back page of each of these one-pagers. So the front page is unique to each basin, and the back page information is the same. And this is really giving the snapshot of what are the data attributes that we would like to get filled out for this update of projects in the next phase. We had a contractor and part of the current technical analysis update review all of the projects as well, and there's a lengthy document that steps through what each of these attributes are and why they might be essential for some sort of consolidated project database. And this just gives a highlight of, based on each plan that we have in the project list, where each basin falls, and having some of this information already there, obviously at varying levels of completeness and detail for each of these attributes. So we'll send that around. Those are just PDFs, and we have had some feedback from your implementation working group members or volunteers on some of these, so feel free to chat with them and share with your roundtables. Just, I guess, another reminder is that for every meeting we've had with the implementation working group, we have posted all the slides and recordings from each of those conversations. So if there's ever an interest or curiosity to go back and listen to those, they are available on the WaterPlan website under that implementation tab. And we've posted materials that we've covered in that group. We have, I guess, 2 more meetings with the implementation working group, correct? And then 2 more webinars for the technical update webinars that we've been running through monthly. And the next webinar is next week, next Tuesday, along with the next implementation working group meeting. And that will be covering our environmental data and methodologies. And then there'll be one final webinar on June 25th. And all of these tech webinars have been posted on the web as well. So you can review those as resources, both for ourselves, for the roundtable members, and anyone interested once they start to dig into that tech update information. So just a reminder, we have the C9, the Colorado 9 Basin Roundtables Summit in September. And along with this follow-up email, we'll send a link to the registration page that we have for this event. We'd like to start to push people to sign up. We only have a few from the initial email that we sent when we first announced this summit. So we are waiting on a link from the hotels, the final link for a room block information, but we would like that circulated amongst your membership to really get people signing up for that. There's funding available for for roundtable members to attend. This will be at the discretion of, each roundtable, how you would like to divide it up. But there's 18,000 across all the basins, and what we've done is divide that amount based on how far it is from your roundtable meeting location to Winter Park. And this meeting will be at the new Headwater Center in Winter Park. So it's slightly different numbers for each roundtable, just based on how far it is for your membership to travel. I'll provide a spreadsheet that you can kind of play with numbers based on mileage, lodging, or both, but funds can't cover food. So it will just be for mileage to get there and lodging to stay. You can choose to do just mileage and, spread that out between more members, or however you've done it in the past. Regardless, every individual will need to fill out a travel reimbursement for their exact cost and provide a W-9. And that's how we've done it in years past. And I will send around that spreadsheet so you can play with those numbers. I think we have decided that in addition to attendance at the C9 Summit being covered for all roundtable members, that there is room for 2 students from each roundtable that can have their registration waived. Outside of students and regular roundtable membership, there is a fee to help cover costs for food. Anything you guys can think of as far as? Okay, I think that's all we have. Does anyone have any questions?
Real quick, one other thing. Elgin Turner is here, and as you all probably know, hopefully know, Elgin has replaced Viola Bralish with duties with roundtable coordination and a lot of logistics and whatnot. So just want to make sure that everyone is acquainted with Elgin. He's been trying to make his rounds physically to all the roundtables to meet everyone and really get to see how the roundtables operate. So I think, for example, he's going up to the North Platte Roundtable next week. They'll be having a meeting. So just say hi when you see Elgin, and he's been doing a wonderful job getting everything coordinated for us.
And that's who those travel reimbursements would be sent to, or Elgin, and he'll help process all those.
Megan, did you say that there's a fee to attend the C9 Summit?
Not for roundtable members, okay. For anyone outside of the roundtable.
How much is that?
Funny, I know you're going to ask that, right?
I believe it's $75.
Yeah, $75.
We just have to cover our costs.
So our roundtable has a lot of interest from folks who aren't officially roundtable members. We're going to charge them $75 if they're not a voting member.
That's what we've done in years past as well for statewide summit.
To cover food, and that's all. I mean, that's the type of things that could also be reimbursed, and some of that money that we're providing too, if you wanted.
So on that reimbursement, can that extend? So we have some faithful attendees who, are very interested and do a lot of work for us, but they're not official members. So are they eligible for reimbursement? Is that what you're saying?
I believe so.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So
that would include the $75 fee if they need it.
Yeah, if you wanted to include that on, what you would be covering.
It would be up to you to decide, or the roundtable to decide how they want to divvy up those dollars. You could do 50% of the registration fee and lodging and food and travel. You could do one of those things. You could do the full cost. It's just, we can send the breakdown, and then you guys just decide how you think is best to use it.
I'll add a column for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? I know that's a lot of information. Hopefully you guys have certainly seen a lot of this, but we really want to make sure that everyone understands all these different moving parts right now.
Oh, I have one more random question. And
gotcha.
I'm looking at the picture of the Headwaters Center. I'm not familiar with it. What is it?
It's awesome. It's actually a nonprofit, and they are just opening this summer, and so it's brand new, but they are focused on, there's actually it's an ecology, events, and education center. So they're positioning as a nonprofit hub for mountain entertainment and higher education and water education specifically.
And I think it's actually the philanthropic arm of the Devil's Thumb Ranch, Bob Fanch. I think it's his enterprise, so it's his way to kind of give back to the community up there, my understanding. And it's that really nice building on the, what is that, the north side of Winter Park as you're leaving towards Fraser. It's on the right side.
Yeah, I think so.
So
it's gorgeous, so it'll be nice to check out. They have an outdoor space too, with a big stage if anyone's feeling confident. Any other questions?
Well, thanks all for attending. I know everyone is busy. You certainly know where to find us with any other questions or comments, but I'm happy to stay on for another few minutes if you folks are thinking of things to ask, or otherwise cut things short.
Well, I guess I have one more question. So we're going to have a master contractor for BIP updates, and then each roundtable will have an endeavor as a subset of that. And does that mean?
Yeah, really.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, so my ultimate question is, are we going to have to find, well, the roundtables have to find third-party fiscal agents to handle all this, or is this mechanism that you have going to take care of that?
Yeah, great question. It's super helpful. So two things. One is the answer is no, you won't have to have a fiscal agent. So that was by design. Going through this process helped kind of solve that issue of roundtables not being fiscal agents and not having to find someone and not having to then have some kind of admin fee across all of the various fiscal agents that would kind of eat into that money. So now the general contractor would develop a list of local experts. And so it's a good point you're bringing up. One thing we'd like to have the roundtables explore, and maybe something we'd probably follow up with an email to this group, is helping us put together a list of any local contractors, consultants that you, the roundtable, have used. So certainly anyone that developed your BIPs, but there's probably a ton of people that we don't know that do work with or have presented to the roundtables. Basically, when you have a general contractor, you can have a list of, it could be 100 different groups on that list of possible subcontractors that they could bring on. At this point, you don't have to have the burden of saying, I know I want to use X, Y, or Z, or I'd probably pick between these two people, but I'm not sure. If we could start to develop a laundry list of anybody you think within any scope or reason you might possibly use, we can just have the general contractor add that to their list, and then that can be something that's determined down the road.
Sounds good. That gets rid of a huge burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really our hope. We've heard a lot over and over of just how much, the BIP updates take time, that, roundtables are volunteer, do a lot of work already, have, other priorities that they're trying to tackle too. And so we're really hoping that this general contractor, as well as the local contractor, can really serve as almost adjunct staff in a way that can really help make this not such a heavy lift.
So the general contractor will help keep the local contractors herded up and not from wandering off piste.
Well, I think what we really want, if ideally we'll get a lot of good input from the roundtables of how they want to tweak things. It's absolutely not we realize it's not a one size fits all. At the same time, when it comes down to things like this missing data that we were talking about, or even just the complexity of some of this, the modeling effort that we've been through, we talked a lot with the implementation working group, and they're like, wow, this is really in the weeds. And so to have just that central point person that can kind of get the really deep dive and then go back to the basins and help say, here's what I want to do, here's what I don't want to do, and then kind of coordinate with us on the best path forward. Hopefully we you allow for some flexibility there where the roundtable can really dive into things that they find interesting and then still have some level of just parity across each of the BIP updates.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again to everyone for being on the call. Any other last questions, comments?
Well, here's one more question. So, working up the agenda for the C9 summit, I like your little acronym there. How's that going to occur, and are you taking ideas, or what's that going to look like?
So we've really just done a rough draft, and we were going to run that by the implementation working group on our next call. But certainly happy to either on this call right now, if you got an idea, or if you want to email us separately. Certainly open to taking ideas for sure.
Yeah. Well, in your minds, was the summit just going to be concerned with basin implementation updates, or on the West Slope, we're working on our risk study and things like that, and I don't know whether there's something that could be on the agenda about that, let everybody know what's happening, or just wondering what you're thinking.
I think the goal for the day would definitely be to really have this be the formal launch of the BIP update. That being said, I think that there's definitely some room and flexibility in there to talk about a few things. I mean, what might be interesting potentially is to talk about just modeling in general and how the different approaches are taken to modeling, and any number of assumptions you put into the model will yield a different answer on the back end. So in that context, I think there could be a pretty interesting discussion that would talk about, our modeling effort, and certainly our modeling effort is constrained by what we can legally do. We know that in other basins like the Yampa, they're out in front of modeling, and they're doing some things and making different assumptions than we are. So, we hear from Kevin, for example, a lot about using paleohydrology versus some of the scenarios that we've developed. So I think there could be a really neat discussion around that.
Yeah, certainly we'll be framing up the tech update, Jim, and all the data that's coming out of that when we release it in July. We'll be talking a little bit more at Water Congress as well in August, and then really kind of using that framework to kind of present what the analysis really comes up with, all the different gaps, different data, and then kind of using that to pivot into updating the basin plans more specifically.
Good. Well, the four West Slope Basin roundtables are meeting June 20th, and it would probably be an oversight if we didn't have some kind of report out to our roundtable brothers and sisters and cousins around the state. So I guess that's sort of the bottom line of what I'm thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, we will definitely have staff at that meeting too, Jim. So we're happy to tag team with you or whatever's most appropriate.
Yeah, and we can definitely coordinate on the agenda as we kind of refine it and see what room we have in to do updates.
Yeah.
So, Mike, are you still on the phone?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I'm sure you're thinking along the same lines.
Yeah, no, interesting discussion. Yeah, for sure, Jim.
And Jim, this is Kathleen. I'm thinking the same way. Kathleen Curry.
Okay. Got it. Good. I didn't know who all was on the phone. Thanks.
Hey, you were doing such a good job. We were just letting you carry the load.
Yeah, well, that's what I let you and Kathleen do on our individual calls.
Hey, Greg, this is Mark Shea. I'm curious back on the BIP update process with the general contractor and the local experts in the different basins. What will be your all's approach as to the cost allocation or funding allocation between the general contractor and then the various basins?
Our goal is to make them as equal as possible, Mark. There's, that's how we've kind of pitched it to the board, and that's what we've gotten approval for. On some level, I think we have to recognize that there's also a time per touch on, for example, an IPP. So if one basin has 500 and another has 2, there's more time going in that. So we're trying to frame up the dollars so that it's equitable, but then the contractor has some flexibility if they know they're going to spend more time on one thing than the other. But our goal is to make it fair.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. Between the general contractor and the basin local experts, are the funding available within each basin?
Oh, the split there as far as the exact dollars?
Yeah,
we're working on that right now, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be held to it, but I mean, right now, if, for example, I think that the devil's in the details. So again, if the GC that gets hired is the exact same person that you would have hired in your basin, we want to allow some flexibility there, to not be hamstrung to say you have to spend this additional dollars in a certain way. So we're trying to be delicate about how we frame up that language. It's also true that the general contractor is almost certainly going to have a host of core consultants that they have on their team. So for example, if you have somebody doing modeling that's a part of the GC, it probably makes sense on some level, if there's anything that's going to be done through modeling, to have that run through one person through the whole state, so then their time would be allocated to that basin or to each basin, but it kind of rolls up to the GC. So what that filters down to at the local level as far as what that cost would be for local expert, and I'm just spitballing, we're just kind of in drafts with the RFP right now, but might be like $150K for local expert with some flexibility for that to change.
And again, Mark, with a lot of that heavy lifting done by the general contractor, so this is the trick, is how to be as equitable as possible, but still have that flexibility. And Russ and Megan and others here, we're working really hard to figure out what that RFP looks like when we release that soon. And going back, I think we've had other presentations with you showing, that just the wide spectrum that the BIPs first time around ranged from 100,000 to well over 1 million. So there's a pretty big spectrum, and the whole thrust of updating these is to really try to streamline that process. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, so it shouldn't cost as much in theory next time. But there's still a lot of work to be done, especially with project refinement and whatnot. So
yeah. So the actual allocation, like the dollar allocation per basin, would be much higher than that. Just trying to tease out exactly which role is the role of the local expert and which is the role of the GC or the GC's team. And so that's really, Mark, why we want you and the rest of the chairs on the selection committee, because you can ask them directly that question and make sure that you feel comfortable with the answers you're getting back.
Yeah, good question though, Mark. Any other questions?
One more thought on the agenda building is that another report out would be probably what the work groups, what the CWCB demand management work groups are doing, just a status update on that process would probably be appropriate. September 25th and 26th.
Definitely, yeah. Good call, Jim. Thanks. And Jim, just to remind me, you will have a pretty full report out at the West Slope Roundtable meeting on the 27th of June. Bless you. On the risk study.
You're asking a question that we will?
Sorry. Yeah. I was just asking about the risk study and kind of the nature of that on the agenda at the West Slope Roundtable meeting.
Yeah. We'll have a good report out, and we'll have an organized, facilitated discussion like we did last year, and try and figure out where the West Slope Roundtables need to go on this subject of our own ability to develop water or our ability to forbear. So yeah, we'll have something for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Good. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks again to everyone. We will be sending out some of these materials we've talked about. Please let us know if we've missed anything, any other follow-up questions or comments, any other materials you might need. And if you need that link to where we're posting things again, we'll send that out as well.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you much.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thanks all.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
See you later.